Hilchas Temurah Perek Shlishi. Kesed din ha-Temuras likarv. So when a person said, he said Arizu Temurah Zu, so the din is V'hoyahu Temurasa Yer Kedesh. So obviously the original behema remains as it was, and now the din is that the Temurah is also Kedesh. So what's the din as Temurah as far as likarv is concerned? So the din is Azay. Temurah Sa'ela Tikra Vela. If a person made a Temurah of a carbon Eila, so the Temurah is also Nikrav as a carbon Eila. B'mhoyson Temurasa Nikeva Ibalasmum. And therefore, as a nekeva, you can't bring it as an oiler, and as a balmum, you also can't bring it as a carbon. So tira hanekeva achipul b'mum viti mocher v'yavi d'ma'ila. So it's considered it has kedusha seila, but on the other end you can't bring it as an oiler. So mainly you have to wait until it has a mum, and then you bring b'damei oiler. Temurah sachatas Thomas k'misha b'yarne b'psula mikdash, and that's from the chatois hameses. So temurah sachatas is Thomas. Temurah sa'osham is tira achipul b'mum. So you have the original asham. So the original asham you bring as an asham, and the Temurah asham is considered like moiser asham, and moiser asham is yiplu damel and adava. So that Temurah is yira. You can't bring it as a carbon yira because you can't bring an asham as a carbon nedava. So yira yiplu b'mum, and then yiplu damel and adava. Temurah hashlamim kishlamim l'chol davar. Tuna smicha unesachim utnufas chazav v'shek. So the Vaila we learned about the Temurah Seila is Nikra Ve'ela. If it's an Akeva or it's a Balmum, so then is Yira Chipul Bamum. Temurah Sachatas is Thomas, and Temurah Sa'ashim is Tira Chipul Bamum, and V'yiplu Damel and Adava. And Temurah Sa'shlamim is Yikav Shlam, has a regular din of a Shlam that Smicha, the Sachim, Tnufas Chaz V'Shek. Now Temurah Sateda is also like a Shlam Kiteda Ella. The difference is only she'ena tuna lechem k'mishabiyana b'hilchus p'sulam mekdashim. Normally a teida needs the lechem, the 40 lechamim. Masha'enke the Temurah teida doesn't have lechem. Temurah haPesach, the Temurah of a Pesach. So as I say, there's a pasuk that says v'negeh the pasuk of Shlomim. It says in Kesev Hu. So over there we learn out from the word im and hu. We learn out im is l'rabes also. That the Temurahs of a Shlomim, the Temurahs of a Pesach has a din of a Shlom, and who is to teach us that it's not Nikra of a Shlom. So there's a Ribu in a Mir. So we learn out it depends when you made the Temurah of the Pesach. Did you make it before Chatzeis or after Chatzeis? Now, a carbon Pesach after Chatzeis is royally carved. It's already a carbon which is royally carved. It's after Chatzeis. That's the time to be makar of a carbon Pesach. If you make a Temurah of that carbon Pesach, so maybe you don't bring a second carbon Pesach, so it's kilo like some moiser of a Pesach, so maybe as a din of a Shlom. Masha'enkin Kedem Chatzeis, but based on this limud of this miut, since Kedem Chatzeis, so the heim is not, the carbon is not really royally carved, so therefore, this Temurah is not Nikra. That's the difference. Temurah HaPesach is in heimer bo Kedem Chatzeis Yimar Basar, is ain't Temurah Sekrevi. You're not actually makriv the Temurah itself. Elatira, Achiyipul Bamum, and Biyavi with the Mershlam. It's the domim. It's like because a Pesach Ba'atzim is a Shlam. If it's not a Pesach, it's a Shlam. So you go ahead and bring B'domer Shlam. But there's not enough Kedusha, so to speak, in the carbon Pesach before this Acher Chatzeis to be able to be matvis the Temurah, that the Temurah itself should be Shlam. Because it didn't yet reach the time where it's royally Karv al Gabi HaMizbech. However, V'im Heimer Ba'acher Chatzeis, so then Arei Temurah Atzma Tikrav Shlam is Nachamal. So a Temurah of a Shlamim itself, a regular Shlam, is Nikra Shlam. A Temurah of a Teida is also Nikra as a Teida, except it doesn't have the Lecham. Masha'enkin, the Temurah of a Karban Pesach, it depends. If it was Lifnei Chatzeis, so maybe it's not yet red royally Karev, so then it's not Matvis, the Temurah with that Kedusha, that it should be Nikra Shlamim, but rather is Tira Yipul Bamum, and then the Yavi with the Meshlam. Masha'enkin, if the Pesach was Lacher Chatzeis, so then we're learning out really from a Pasuk. So then the Temurah is Nitfas, and the Temurah itself is Nikrav Shlam. Now Temurahs HaBcher VaHaMaiser, the Temurah of HaBcher VaHaMaiser Einam Kreivim Leilam. There's no akrava for a Temurah of HaBcher VaHaMaiser. Shnamar, B'Bcher LaHashem Hu. So we learn out a limud in Piashmul Lomdu Hu Karev Ve'en Temurah Sekreiva. So there's no musig of being makriv a Temurah of a Bcher or a Maiser. And now so that's a special limit by Bcher, and V'din HaMaiser B'Bcher. And so what happens? So Temurah Tira Chipul B'Mum, and then V'Tiyachel. So it has the same din of the Maiser and the Bcher. A Maiser and the Bcher that gets a mum. So when it gets a mum, there's no pidyon. once it gets a mum, you can be eaten. A bcher is eaten by the kehanim, and the meiser is eaten by the Yisrael, by the owner of the meiser. So al derech zeh over here, the Temurah of a bcher and a meiser, there's no musig of being makravit before it has a mum. That's the first din, that there's no din of Temuras habcher v'ameiser to be makravit al gabe mizbeach before it has a mum. So what you have to do is wait until it gets a mum, and then it's teyochel. After it's teyochel. Now Temuras habcher is lekenim. Just like the bcher is given to the kehanim, so the Temurah of the bcher is also given to the kehanim. But again, the kehanim, says a bcher, a normal bcher, a kehan brings al gabe mizbeach, and if it has a mum, then he eats it. The Temurah of a bcher, there's no option of bringing al gabe mizbeach. The only option is to wait till it gets a mum, and then the kehan eats it. The Temuras ha'meiser is lebailim. Shem paid bcher u'meiser shenafel b'mum k'mishibiyanu b'hilchas yisurim mizbeach. There's no din of p'diya. As soon as it's nafel b'mum, so there's a din that it's a heter achila. There's kach and paid Temurasim. There's no din pidyon for the Temurah of a bcher u'meiser. So in other words, you just wait until nafel b'mum and you eat it. Who eats it? So by a bcher, the kehan eats it, and by meiser Yisrael eats it. Halacha Gimel. Behemo shehigdisha chetzi eila v'chetzi shlam. So the din is, you obviously can't bring it al gabi hamizbech. It's chetzi eila v'chetzi shlam. So it's tira at sheyir shipul b'mum. And then you bring, with half of the money, you bring an oil, and half of the money you bring a shlam. Now if you went ahead and made a Temurah kameyo, the Temurah of such a behem is also kameyo. So it's also tira at sheyipul b'mum, and half of it is an oil, and half of it is a shlam. Now v'chein kol behemes hakodesh, she'ena kreva mipnei tchilas hekdesha. If you have a hegdish, which can't be nikrav al gab mizbeach because of the way it was mugdash lechatchila. In other words, the person is harei Temurah kameyo, even though the Temurah be'etzim is shaykh to be nikrav. For example, if a person, went ahead and he was magdish a nekeva for an oila can only be a zachar. He went ahead and was magdish a nekeva for an oila. So lepel, this nekeva has to be tirat sheyibul b'mum and yavi b'dom of oila. You have to bring a zachar or an oila. Now, what happens if you go ahead and you make a Temurah of this behemoth? In other words, you have a behemoth which is a nekeva, and it's kedushas eila, which really can't be nikrav al gabe mizbeach, and then you made a Temurah for this behemoth. So the din is that this Temurah, and the Temurah was a zachar, so the Temurah could be brought as an eila. But the din is, since this Temurah is a Temurah of a behemoth, which is not nikrav al gabe mizbeach, it's tirat shipul b'mum, and then v'yav b'dom of eila. So this zachar also, you can't go ahead and bring the zachar al gabe mizbeach, but rather you have to wait until tirat shipul b'mum, this Temurah, and then v'yavi b'dam avela. That's this din. Kol behemes hakedesh she'ena kreva mipnei tchilas hekdesha. So are Temurah kameyo, and you can't bring the Temurah either. Now Omar chatzi behemezu Temurah v'chetzi oila. Person says chatzi behemezu Temurah and v'chetzi oila. So the din is harei tikra vela. Now we learned before that you cannot make Temurah from Eivarim. You can't go ahead and say, these Eivarim, this should be a Temurah for a certain behemoth. It has to be behemoth b'behemoth. It has to be a whole behemoth. However, the din is, we also learned that if a person goes ahead and takes something that on neshama tluya b'eh, and he says that Roisha shel behemoth zu should be Temurah of this other behemoth, which is kotshim. So since the Roisha is the aver shel neshama tluya b'eh, so the entire behemoth becomes Temurah. Since it's Roisha, since it's something which on the neshama tluya b'eh, so the entire behemoth becomes Temurah. Now, l'chura over here also, when a person says chatzi behemoth zu Temurah, if a person would just say chatzi behemoth zu is Temurah for this other behemoth, so since the chatzi behemoth is the aver shel neshama tluya b'eh, so the entire behemoth would become Temurah. The problem is over here, he's saying chatzi behemoth zu Temurah v'chatzi eila. So simultaneously, while this chatzi behemoth zu is becoming Temurah, it's also becoming chatzi eila. So the Temurah can't be mispashet in the chetzi oila. And since it can't be mispashet in the chetzi oila, so the Temurah is not chal. Because the Temurah can only be chal on an entire behemoth. It can't be chal on a half a behemoth. So because he added the words v'chetzi oila, so there, if he would have just said chatzi behemoth zu Temurah, it would have taken been Temurah. Because it would have been Eiver Shel Neshama Tluya B'eh, and it would have been mispashet b'kula. But since he also added v'chetzi oila, so therefore it doesn't become Temurah, because lepela can be mispashet. It's lepela, it's chetzi oila. Now the chetzi oila could be a chetzi oila. Chetzi oila could. So the Temurah is not chal. Once the Temurah is not chal, so chetzi oila is chal, because a chetzi oila could be chal on a chotzi as well. Doesn't have to be mispashet. And lepel, since it's Eivish and Neshama Tluya Be'er, it isn't Spashit. So the behem is an Eila. So the Cheshbon is, it's not a Temurah because a Temurah has to be Chal on an entire behem, and it can't be an entire behem because Chatzi Eila. And once it's Chatzi Eila, so the it becomes Kuli Eila because the Temurah wasn't Chal. Is Amar Chatzi Behem Azu, Temurah v'Chatzi Eila, is Arezu Tikra Eila. Now what happens if he says Chatzi Eila v'Chatzi Meiser? He says Chatzi Eila v'Chatzi Meiser is Tikra Eila because you can't go ahead and be meichel kedushas meiser. Meiser is the chametzias where hasiri yeh kedush l'Hashem. You're counting the behemoths, and then the 10th becomes kedush. There's no metzias of saying hareza meiser. So when a person says chetzi eila, that it could be meichel. It could be meichel the chales of chetzi eila. And by saying chetzi meiser is not saying anything. It didn't say anything because there's no gather of chetzi eila. So the kedusha of the chetzi eila is mispashel. I mean, there's no gather of chetzi meiser rather. So the kedusha of the Chetzi Eila is mispashel bekula. Now what happens when a person says Chetzi Temurah v'Chetzi Meiser? He says Chetzi Temurah, and then he says v'Chetzi Meiser. So be'emes is the Chetzi Meiser is nothing. He didn't really say anything. There's no real Chetzi Meiser. So and if he would have just said Chetzi Temurah, as we said, the Temurah would have been mispashel because since it's a Eiver Shaneshama Tluya, it's not like saying Eiver Zu is Temurah for that behemoth. Because we're dealing with an Eiver and Neshama Tluya. So the Temurah should be mispashad on the whole behemoth. It's key like you said on the whole behemoth. But since Sof Kol Sof you said Chetzi Meiser, so Eina Chinami, the Meiser is not being Chal, but by saying Chetzi Meiser, it's key like you're saying, I don't want that the Temurah should be mispashad b'kulei. Maybe it's like I'm saying I don't want the Temurah should be mispashad b'kulei. So maybe I'm talking about Feirish only saying Chetzi Temurah. No, Chetzi Temurah can't be Chal. So that's good for the Suffolk. In other words, on one hand, if I say Chetzi Temurah v'Chetzi Eila, there's nothing to talk about it, that it's not Chal the Temurah. And the Eila is Chal. Over here, the Meiser is not Chal because there's not Shaykhs to be Magdish something by Kedushas Meiser. Kedushas Meiser is not something that can be Meichel through being saying Harezu Meiser. It's only by having the Assyria Kedush that there's actually 10 behemoths, and you counted it and it came out to be the 10th. But on the other hand, could be it's enough to stop the Temurah from being Chal. That's the Suffolk. Chetzi Temurah, Chetzi Meiser, Arezu, Suffolk, Ve'ena Kreva. That's all Derech HaPoshet. Halacha, there's a lot of Achreinim that talk about everything. Sameach, Achiezer, Arichus Advarim in this Inyan. But the Pash, that's the Chur of the Poshet Pshat. Halacha Dalet. Hamagdish Balas Mum Ever. Person was Magdish a Balas Mum Ever. So we learned, when you Magdish a Bal Mum Kavua, so there's no Kedushas Aguf. It's only a Kedushas Dom. Masha'enke, when you Magdish a Balas Mum Ever, or certainly if you Magdish something which has no mum, and then later it got a mum, so there was a musig of Kedushas Aguf. Halacha Dalet. Hamagdish Balas Mum Ever, Ve'en tzorach leima tmima v'achar kach neilud b'mum kavua, Vin Nivdis, and it went ahead and it was still Nivdis, and Vehemer bo'achar shenivdis, Harizu Temurah. So in other words, even though the Churad threw the pidyon took away the Kedusha, but some of the Kedusha remained, because we learned that that's why it's also Begiz of Aveda. It's also Begiz of Aveda because some of the Kedusha remained. The pidyon didn't take off all the Kedusha. And since it was a Kedusha Saguf, so it didn't take off all the Kedusha, so Mela, that Kedusha is enough to make Temurah. Aber ve'ena kreva, that Temurah, that this behemoth that was Nivdis, you can't bring Al Gabi HaMizbeach, ve'ena Nivdis, and you also can't be paid it. Why? Elaman Nichat Shetomus. The only eitzah is to be Nichat Shetomus. Eina kreva, why can it be kreva? Neishe bo mikeh Kedusha Tchuya. It's not really, the makar of this Temurah is not a kutcha which you can be makar Al Gabi HaMizbeach. We're talking about something that was already Nivda. So since it was Nivda, so Mela it can't be Nikra Al Gabi HaMizbeach. So therefore that's called the Kedusha Tchuya. But on the other hand, so if that's the case, so let's be paid it. Says Neve'ina Nivdas, She'en Bekeach Kedusha Saliftis P'dyena. There's not enough Kedusha in this Temurah in order to be able to be paid it. To be paid it has to be a certain amount of Kedusha which can be Matfis P'dyena. No, the pidyon should be Chal in something. So over here, this behemoth, Nachamot, so this behemoth that's a Temurah of a behemoth which was Kaddish Kedushas Aguf originally, and then it was Nivda, so now it still remained, there's still remnants of Kedusha there, and that comes out in the din that's also Begiz of Aveda, but so Memela, so therefore it could be Matvis Temurah, it cause Temurah, but on the other end, the Temurah that it causes, it can't cause the Temurah that it should be Nikrav, and Al Derazeh, it can't be caused that the Temurah should be Nivda. So mainly the only eitz is manichat shetomas. Halacha hey. Now we mentioned that umagdish behema, that's not a balmum. So then this chal, or even it's a balmum ever, so it's chal kedushas haguf. So then later, even if you paid it through a mum kavua, that it got, so then even though you're paid it, but nevertheless it's still asur b'gizav aveda. Masha'inkin, if you have something that was mlechatchila, that mlechatchila had a mum, when you were magdish it was magdish with a mum, so Melid never really received kedushas haguf because he can't be chal kedushas haguf on the balmum lihi karev. So then, when you paid it, there's no iser gizav aveda. You paid it, it's nivda legamri. And this is the chiddush by a Temurah, that a Temurah, since the pasuk says that being tev l'ra, whether ra betev, so therefore we learn now that even if it was a bal mum kavua, when you made it into Temurah, so nevertheless it's chal kedushas haguf, and therefore even when you paid it and it has a mum, you still is asur b'gizav aveda. That's this halacha. Halacha kol Temuris. Shahayu bali mum kavuim mitchilasam, before you will magdish it for Temurah, is harei yipadi. You can be paid it when it has a mum. It can be paid it. Aber ve'enam yeitzim l'chulim l'chol davar. They can't. They're not yeitzim l'chulim l'chol davar. Kedei shimutar begizav aved achim b'dyenam, like a regular hegdish, which the hegdish was chal on a bal mum kavua, so it's only a kedushas damim, and therefore once you paid it, you could be mutar begizav aveda. Over here it's different. Shagdusha chola b'tmura al balas mum kavua. The kedusha, or kedushas haguf, is chal on a tmura, even if it was a bal mum kavua. Shenamar ira b'tev v'ra homer kan hu bal mum k'yetzebei shein roy lekarbon v'afal became kosev yiyah kedush. So the pasuk clearly says that by tmura yiyah kedush, even if it's ra b'tev. In other words, even if it's a bal mum, it has a din of kedushas haguf. The kedusha of tmura is chal should have a din of kedushas haguf, even though it's a bal mum milchatchila. Halacha Vav. Oila shemisarve bezvachim. You have a carbon oila, and it was inside in a different carbon, let's say a shlam. And then you went ahead, vehemer ba'achas minat haruvas. You made Temurah with one of these two behemoths. You said that this behemoth's chulin should be tachazu, but you don't know what the zu is. You don't know what the kachim is. Is it an oila or a shlam? So you don't know if the Temurah is a Temurah's oila, Temurah shlam. So now what do you do with this Temurah? So the eight say you can't do anything, because if you're going to go ahead and let this Temurah yirat sheipul b'mum, so the question is, what are you going to do with the money? What are you going to do? You're going to go ahead and be paid it. What are you going to do with the money? You have to go ahead and use the money to buy a similar behemoth. But while the behemoth doesn't have a mum, you don't know what to do with it. And even if the behemoth will have a money, you're not going to know what to do with the money. So what's the eitzah? The eitzah is areze maybe behemoth acher. So he has to bring another behemoth, ve'emer. Im Temuras Eili Hizu, if this behemoth over here, which I don't know which Temurah is, if it's a Temuras Eili or a Shlam, is Arei Behemoth Zu Shlam, so then this behemoth should be the other one. The Im Temuras Shlam Mizu, Arei Behemoth Zu Eila. So Memela, once we have that, is Venimtza, so it comes out, a Behemoth Shehevi, Im Temurah, together with the Temurah that was, we have a Temurah, we don't know if it's an Eila or Shlam. And now we have another behemoth, which is whichever the Temurah is, the other one is the other one. So these two behemoths are oila u'shlam sh'nesarva. They're basically two karbanis. One of them is an oila, one of them is a shlam. Either the Temurah is an oila, so the new behemoth is a shlam, or the Temurah is a shlam, and the new behemoth is an oila. And what do you do now? So the Rambam doesn't say what you do now. The Rambam already said earlier in Psula Mikdashim that the eitzah is that you go ahead now, you let the two of the behemoths yirat sheipul b'mum, and then you have the money of both of them, and then you take another two behemoths, and you buy one an oila, one a shlam, and you say the money of this oila, the oila, whatever, the oila is mechul on the oila, and the money of the shlam is mechul on the shlam. Or you buy two behemoths with this money, and you say the oila money is for this behemoth, and the shlam money is for this behemoth. That's the eitzah. Now, so that's eitzah number one. Now, chazer v'heber ba'achas mishtein. Now we have an extension of this previous story. You went ahead, you had two behemoths, you didn't know which one was watch. You didn't know which one was the oil, which one was the shlam. You went ahead and made Temurah with one of them, so you didn't know if it was a Temurah Seil or Temurah Shlam. And now you mixed it together with another behemoth. So you have now, what you have is a Temurah either oil or shlam, together with either an oil or a shlam. That's what you have. You have two behemoths now, which one of them is a Temurah oil or shlam, and the other one is either a carbon itself oil or shlam. Now the din is that ain't Temurah is a Temurah. You can't make a Temurah from a Temurah. So Mele, if you're Meimer with a Temurah, the Temurah is not Chal. Now, Chazer v'Heimer b'achas v'shteim. You went ahead and you had these two behemoths. One was a Temurah of either an Eilah or a Shlom, and the other one was either an Eilah or a Shlom. And now you went ahead and made Temurah with one of them. You don't know which one you made Temurah with. So if you made the Temurah with the Temurah, so it's not Chal. And if you made the Temurah with the Eilah Shlom, so then it's either an Eilah or Shlom. It's either Temurah's Eilah or Shlom. So this new Behema, which you made Temurah, the second Temurah, is a suffix, whether it's Mechlal Chul, because it was never Chal, because it's a Temurah of a Temurah, or it's maybe the Temurah of an Eilah, and maybe it's a Temurah of a Shlom. So what do we do now? So again, the same thing is maybe Zevach Acher Mitech Beisei, and you bring another carbon Mitech Beisei, Ve'emer ala Temurah Shniya, and you say on this Temurah Shniya, this second Temurah, which was a suffix Temurah of a Temurah, suffix Temurah's Eilah, suffix Temurah Shlom. So they say, if Temurah's Temurah Yizu, if the Temurah's, you bring another Behemah, you know, maybe Zevach Acher, you bring another Behemah Mitech Beisei, Ve'emer ala Temurah Shniya. If Temurah's Temurah Yizu, if this Temurah is a Temurah's Temurah, so what I'm bringing now, this new Behemah, is Chulun. So Mele is nothing. So Mele we're going to have two Behemahs Chulun there. The Im Temurah's Eilah Shlamli, if this Behemah is either a Temurah's Eilah, or maybe Temurah Shlam, is Arezeh Shehevi Eilah Shlam, in other words, it's the other one. In other words, it's the same thing. In other words, late at Tzad, that this is either a Temurah's Eilah or Temurah Shlamim, so this Behemah is going to be either an Eilah or a Shlam. Now you have over here two behemoths. You have two behemoths. Now you'll have two sveikas. You have a suffix whether these two behemoths are maybe both chulim. And now you have another suffix, maybe these behemoths are an eilah, a tmuras eilah, and a shlam mixed together, or tmuras shlam and eilah mixed together. So in eilah, harei ze shehevi, v'im tmuras eilah shlam, harei ze shehevi eilah shlam. V'harei ze shehevi im atmura shniya, is again kezevach utmurish and sarvus abazeh. It's like a zevach utmurish and sarvus abazeh, which is the same story that we had before. We had the same story with the story before. That's a zevach and a tmurish and sarvus abazeh. Ukvar biyanu. We already learned Dina Taruvas Bilchas Psulam Mikdashim, which is really what we said before. In other words, it's exactly the same story. In other words, late at Tzad that they're two chulins, so they're both chulins. There's nothing to talk about. And if they're both, so what's going to happen is that he's going to take these two behemoths and he's going to let them both tira chipul bamum, and then he's going to go ahead and buy with these two karbanis with the money of these two behemoths. So if these two behemoths were both chulin, the gardener, so he's buying no two new karbanis with these two with this money. They were both chulin and lepel. He's buying two karbanis. There's nothing wrong. And if they were, it was an elos ushlamim, for example. So then he's buying an Eilah and a Shlom, and the money of the Eilah is going for the Eilah, and the money for the Shlom is going for the Shlom. So basically it's the same din as before. It's just that over here there comes a new factor that there's another suffix. Before there was only a suffix if it's a Temurah's Eilah with a Shlom, or it's a Temurah Shlom with an Eilah. Now we're having another factor, whether it's Bechlal, a Temurah's, maybe it's nothing, or maybe, and Memela, so it's nothing with nothing, though both of them are not really Karbanis. Or it's a Temurah Eilah with a Shlom, or it's a Temurah Shlom with an Eilah. Again, the same exact case. Halacha Zayin. Shlomim shenisarvu bebcheri b'maiser. You have a Shlomim, and it got mixed in with a bcher or a maiser. And lepel v'hemer b'echad, and you made Temurah with one of them. So now again, this Temurah is a suffix. You don't know if it's a Temurah of Shlom, which is Nikrav Shlom, or it's a Temurah of bcher and maiser, which is not Nikrav. Is that Yikrav? You can't be makravit because maybe it's the Temurah of a Bcher or a Maisa, which is not Nikrav. So what do? El Yira. You have to let it be Yira Achipol B'mum, and then be Yipada knows if it's really a Temurah of a Shlomim. So Memela has a din of Yikrav. It has a din that you have to be paid it. Whereas if it's a Temurah of a Bcher or a Maisa, so you don't have to be paid it. So once it gets a mum, you're allowed to eat it. You eat it like a Bcher or a Maisa. Masha'enkin late at Tzad that it may be a shlomim, so you have to be paid it at a yira. Achipul bumum v'yipod because maybe it's a shlomim, and then v'yachol k'bcher k'maisa, and then it's eaten like a bcher k'maisa. Now, when you eat the bcher k'maisa, there's a certain chumrah we learned legabe when you eat the psulam when you eat something that was nifta, something that had a moment, then you were paid it. So when you go ahead and you paid a regular behemoth, you could go ahead and sell it in the shlachtois because of the benefit of hegdish. Mashenkin by Pcher and Meiser, there's no benefit of hegdish, so there's more hakbolas of how you could eat it. You can't eat it in a way that looks like business. So since it might be a Pcher or Meiser, so you have the chumras of Yiachel Pcher Meiser Liyira Achipul Bamum and V'Yipadi. You have to be paid the late tzad that it's shlomim, and V'Yiachel Pcher K'Meiser late tzad that it's Pcher a Meiser K'Meiser B'Yar.